Fast am I. Good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. David Ashford, MHK, is on Mannin Line between now and when? So now and 1 o'clock. So if you want to talk to David Ashford, call 66 13 68. Text 166 177. WhatsApp on the same number. Email studio@manxradio.com. Well, now chair of the Housing and Communities Board and tasked with working alongside the Housing Division of the DOI on, a future and possibly a national housing association, which I just wonder, how much of your time do you think that'll take? Do you think a national housing association possibility, probability?
Well, DOI has been tasked with Tim Ward to go away and look at the concept of a housing association and then report back. So we don't know yet what sort of structure that housing association may take. I was quite bluntly honest in Tim Ward when I stood up and spoke on this item. I've seen examples in the UK of housing associations done very well, and I've seen examples as well of them being done quite abysmally. And for me, a lot of the devil would be in the detail of how the housing associations proposed to be taken. So that's with DOI, and we'll wait to see what DOI comes back to Tim Ward with.
Okay. Oh, fast am I. Good afternoon, brother.
Good afternoon, Andy.
All right. David's first on today. Hi, David. You're live with David Ashford.
Hi, Randy. Hi, Mr. Ashford.
Hi,
Just
David.
quickly, some questions, yeah. One you haven't done for a long while now is the lane between Williston Crescent and Johnny Watson's Lane, and I'll leave it to you. It needs to be done. It was closed illegally, and you and the former minister, who's now the Minister for DOI, Mr. Krukel, said it was unlawful, so something should be done about that. The other one I was going to ask you to, I just want to throw them to you, and then you can talk to Andy about things. Will you, or are you, or will you be in the future a landlord? Because if you're head of the housing board, you will have in your custody, I think it's 3,500 properties around the Isle of Man. So therefore, will you then need to reduce your staff?
Yep, so David, in relation to the Watterson Lane, I'm actually still in a battle over that because the argument that's coming back is that it was legally closed, it's over the notice period, but it's not something I'm giving up on. It's dragging on. I think it's dragged on about two and a half years now, but it is something that I'm still on the ball with, and I'm still fighting to actually get reopened. It's a lane I use myself.
Who are you battling?
So in terms of, I've spoken to Highways, and their view is that Douglas Council was within their rights to close it. But it is something I'm still working on because it is a lane I used to use myself. Whenever I nipped down into Williston to see constituents, I always used it to cut back through, and it was well used. So it's, although it might seem like it's dragging on a while, it's certainly not gone off the radar. In terms of landlords, there's no plans for the Housing Communities Board to become a landlord as such.
But won't it will be because of the nature of the animal you're controlling?
No, the Housing Communities Board is simply a board that pulls together the different elements of government in a coordinated fashion. So it involves DHSC, it involves DOI, it has 4 laymen on it. It's for coordinating the housing policy. It's not actually going to physically drive forward and deliver itself because we only have about 3-4 officers within that area for the Housing Communities Board. It's the other areas of government that have to deliver within their departments like DOI, but we are a coordinating body to make sure that everyone's going in the same direction.
Who is the landlord then for public sector houses?
So at the moment the landlord is DOI, and obviously the local authorities themselves with local authority housing, because there's 2 types of public housing. There's the public housing held by DOI and also the public housing held by the individual local authorities. The plan for the housing association, as it stands currently, we'll wait and see what comes back to Tim Ward, was to transfer the DOI housing into a housing association, which would make the housing association the landlord and make DOI simply a regulator, rather than as it is now, where DOI is both regulator and also a landlord.
David?
Well, regarding the lane, it was never publicised, so to close anything down under the law, you have to put a public notice in the paper. There was no public notice put in the paper, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in Williston hopefully may come on today and say to you and give you the evidence. Regarding being a land...
David, sorry, just go back to this. Why did Highways, why did they want to close the lane? What's the point of closing the lane?
No. As far as I can recollect, and the information I've got is, and I stand to be corrected, but regarding the lane closing it was just done by the Douglas Borough Council, who did it, blocked the lane off, didn't tell any of the residents, didn't consult with anybody at all.
So why did they do it then? Was it just for their convenience? They didn't do it out of spite, I'm sure.
Well, it got rid of a lane which they probably would have to maintain. And I've got a feeling...
Oh, sorry, I think we've lost you. David, are you there? Oh, think your phone's gone. Anyway, just go back to the landlord issue, the public sector landlord. So if the housing association comes into being, it would be the landlord, not the DOI.
So it would be the landlord. So it would be acting as landlord for those DOI properties, and it would create a split between what's there now, where DOI is straddling both sides of the fence, where they're both the landlord and also the regulator as well. Just to come back quickly on the lane, which David got cut off on, one of the things with the lane is that it is written into legislation as well that if someone's going to complain or challenge, it has to be done within a certain amount of time after the first closure of the lane, and that's where the argument is over that timings, because basically the thing from Highways is saying that time had passed by the time the first complaint was put in.
Right. Okay. What would it need, in your opinion, then, for a Manx housing association to be a good housing association?
So for me, it's about tenants first. It's about ensuring that there's mechanisms to make sure that tenants are protected, to make sure that rent can't just be escalated, as has been seen in some parts of the UK, where actually now in some areas, being part of a housing association, there's not much difference to being out in the private rental sector, and ensuring also that maintenance is kept up to date. And for me, I always say with these sort of things, the devil is in the detail. Yeah. And what I'll be looking for is, how is that housing association going to be democratically accountable and held to account?
Would it be a non-profit making organisation?
So the plan is that it would be non-profit making, or that was the initial plan anyway. Like I say, we'll wait and see what DOI comes back with to Tynwald, but the monies generated would go either into the maintenance of the houses, or if there was extras monies generated, into all the housing schemes.
Okay, and often in the UK housing associations, sometimes there's an element of shared equity. Would that arise?
There is. That isn't on the table as far as I'm aware at the moment, but we'd wait and see. I mean, one of the things, I must be honest, you mentioned shared equity, which is very different to, for instance, people having the right to buy the properties. Yes. That's very different. Right to buy is something I've never supported for public housing. I think it absolutely decimated the UK stock in the 80s and 90s, and I think it would do the same here in Ireland, where we've got a limited stock already.
Even if, let's just say, something were proposed whereby any receipts from sales would go straight back to building new properties.
Well, that was what was proposed in the UK in the 80s and 90s, and I'm sorry to sound very cynical, but when these things are proposed, it doesn't mean they always happen, and that's precisely what went wrong in the UK. So we already have a limited housing stock for public sector housing, and I don't want to see that any more limited. So I've always never been a convert to the right to buy for public housing.
And as you say, the devil is in the detail. And what will be your, if you like, your argument to the tenants, to whereby this will be much better for them?
Well, what we need to be able to do is, if we are going to progress this idea, and like I say, for me, it's about putting the tenants first. We've got to be able to show them what will be different, what will actually improve. Yeah. So will they have more responsive maintenance times? Will it be easier for them to get things done? Will it be easier for them to raise queries with their landlord? Because that's what tenants are interested in. And we've got to be able to show that that model actually is going to make a difference to tenants.
Yeah, okay. I just had a couple of comments in also regarding, you're probably familiar with curtilage arguments as well, because obviously if there were a housing association, would they own the freehold of everything up until the pavement? And then where would the DOI and local authority responsibility? It's pavements and things like that.
Yeah, so you've got to remember that when it comes to local authorities, they're acting as a landlord. So the property itself and its curtilage is what would actually transfer over. So we've got to divide off what DOI does. Although they're the highways authority, they are also a housing landlord, and the two are separate.
Okay. All right, let's get to the phones. Julian. Hi, Julian. You're live with David Ashford, MHK.
Hi, Andy, and hello, David.
Hello, Julian.
Hello, mate. Got two quick questions. I'll do
Yeah.
them both for speed. The new Meadows housing development near Janet's Corner in Castletown appears to be causing flooding during wet weather along the Victoria Road section. What's being done to correct what is presumably field water runoff displaced by the new housing development? And I think there's also some flooding problems in Andreas as well, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Second question, the often mentioned electric heat pumps, which will soon become mandatory in new builds. To get to the efficiency often advertised for heat pumps, houses have to be airtight, highly insulated, have underfloor heating if you're going to do this properly, triple glazing, solar panels, and electric MVHR air exchange pumps. If you try and fit these heat pumps to existing normal properties, you're likely to have massive increases in electricity bills far beyond any financial reduction from not using the conventional boilers. Are there any of these design features like underfloor heating, triple glazing or solar panels being fitted to the new build housing stock as standard to get the best out of these heat pumps?
Yeah, so first of all, in relation to the Victoria Road, I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that. That's the first I've heard of that, that it's actually running off and they've got water problems down there with flooding. I will raise it with DOI and actually see what's actually being done to address that. But that's, I can't really answer that because that is the first I've heard of it. In relation to the electric heat pumps, the buildings do need to be airtight and they do need to have other adaptations as well to ensure that you're actually getting the best out of them. The plan for future affordable housing builds is that we have been working with the Climate Change Board around that and what design specs, and the design specs that will be coming forward will require that. As for the new houses that are being built at the moment, my understanding is they are spec'd to be able to take the heat pumps, but you are quite right, we've got to make sure that any technology that's going in there is right, because it's all very well driving the climate change agenda and saying, thou shalt not put this in, but you've got to ensure that there is a proper alternative that's cost effective for people. And I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not sure we're quite there yet in terms of the timescales. It's something we need to look at, because what we don't want to do, particularly at times when energy costs are high anyway, is actually driving people into further debt with energy.
Yeah, it does make you wonder. I mean, if we this word can or could in terms of, whether it be wind turbines and what they can produce or whether it be the heat pumps and how efficient they are, there's other underlying questions. If you're going to do it properly and you have underfloor heating, you need loads more concrete for the screed. You've got to have aluminium for the heat spreading. You've got to have loads more copper and plastic for the extensive pipe work. If you're going to put triple glazing in, then you've got to put a load more glass in because you've got a third pane of glass, which means that the coal blast furnaces are going to be going harder for the glass manufacture. And then you're going to have denser and thicker and heavier plastic window frames. And of course, if they're much, much heavier, you've got the extra loads on the diesel delivery vehicles as well. And the other big question, which Durin has asked a lot as well, is when everybody's got these heat pumps in, even when they're fitted into houses with the perfect scenario like underfloor heating and everything else, the base load, if you take a normal boiler that like a gas or an oil boiler, these heat pumps are using about 40 times the amount of electricity, which is why, if they're not set up properly, your electric bills go through the roof. So there's the other question as well. If you're going to have your housing taking a lot more power, I would imagine you're going to have to talk to the MUA about upgrading the electrical infrastructure. Have you had any conversations about that with the MUA yet?
Well, my understanding is at the moment that's not required. That's not actually required to be able to have those conversations with the MUA. That there's no requirements at the moment to be upping the power supply in that way. In terms of the builds, though, you are right that it is going to change fundamentally the way we look at building houses and what has to be provided. And technology is moving on all the time as well. So one of the things we've got to be very careful of is we don't box ourselves in to one particular area when the technological direction might change and head off in a different one. So it is important when it comes to our plans to build future housing, particularly affordable housing, that we actually monitor what's going on and adapt those plans if things change, because things do change quite radically and the technology is moving on all the time. Heat pumps is a prime example. If you look at where heat pumps are now compared to where they were, say, 10 years ago, it's radically different, and I'm pretty certain in 10 years' time it'll be radically different again.
Okay, all right, thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, David.
Good to hear from you. And Texter 901 said, could you ask David Ashford, if a housing association takes over, will there be new contracts to the tenants?
So, well, that's a matter that would have to be discussed. I would imagine it would be just a transfer of landlord. I wouldn't have thought there'd have to be new contracts as such, in a similar way that you see in the UK when they actually change provider. It's simply a change of provider. I would have thought the terms of the contract would actually remain the same.
Okay, a message in from Karen, who said, at the moment, is there a household income survey for people in social houses? It's the old quoted case of people with six-figure incomes who live in public sector properties.
So what there is there's a 5-year tenancy. So that was brought in, I think, in 2017, the first batch of 5-year tenancies. So they're just coming up for renewal now. So at the end of those 5-year tenancies, everyone's income is assessed against a threshold, the tenant's income. And if they fail that threshold, there's various different steps where their rent will move up towards market value, and then ultimately, if they're over the top threshold, they have to vacate the property and move out of social housing.
What's the top threshold?
So the top threshold, I think, is around about 60,000. But after that, they have to actually vacate. It has affected a lot of people. There is some concerns that I have around the criteria, which I've expressed in Tynwald before, because it doesn't take account of age. So you might have people who've been in low-paid jobs for part of their life, they come into a high-paid job in their 50s, but they're being told they're now over the threshold, but they're due for retirement soon. Or people who haven't got, who've got pension lump sums, which is pushing them over the savings threshold, but the pension lump sum is meant to be to actually pay for their retirement with a reduced pension. So there is anomalies in the system that need sorting out, but there is now a proper means-tested situation in place, because previously you were only means tested going into social housing. There was no means testing after that, and
for those anomalies then in later life, are there discretionary elements to that?
So there is some discretionary elements. I've been talking with DOI as an MHK, not as chair of Housing and Communities Board, as an MHK about that. I raised it in Tynwald, and the department has said they go away and look at it. So I'm expecting something back soon on that.
Okay, we're live with David Ashford, MHK, at 12:25. And Howard, you're live with David Ashford, Howard.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon, Howard.
Apologies, first of all, when your introduction, I didn't hear it all, so if I repeat some of the questions, I apologise for that. But when I hear this housing association rhetoric coming from government, bearing in mind that we've only got 18 months to go, some of the dreadful things that's been happening to various places in the UK, and this will be another UK company coming in to take over the housing stock. We're selling the family cutlery and all the various bits and pieces. We're just getting rid of everything, and we're going to be like a little borough of London or Liverpool or something before long. At least the housing stock that we have here belong to the people of the island. And the housing associations will be profit-making. They will load the stock that they're buying with debt, and they will be paying their shareholders the profits out of the income from that debt, like the steam packet did. That's where we ended up with a £320 million debt after the banks, etc., loaded and loaded with debt, and they never made any profits. And you find this on a lot of occasions where these companies, and a housing association at the end of the day is a company, they don't pay tax because they will say that accountants will say we're not making a profit, so we won't be paying tax, but we can pay the shareholders. So it is a business to them, whereas they call them now social housing, and that is what they're for. They're for the people of the island, not somebody to make a profit out of. And when you see on the television a lot of the housing association flats, houses, and they're quite literally falling down. And people have been pleading for years to get work done. And in actual fact, there was one dreadful case recently where that child died of the black fungus that was in the house and had been reported for years, and this little lad died. Are we going to end up with that? Because if it goes through this government, it's going to be 20 years before it rears its ugly head and we suddenly find ourselves in the position where they are in the UK now.
Right. The important points to point out very, very straight off the bat is there is no plans to bring a UK company in whatsoever. And that it will actually be a wholly owned entity by Isle of Man government, so it will be a Manx Housing Association set up. There's no plans for it to be a private company as in that way. The plans as well, as they stand at the moment, would be for it to be not for profit, so that actually any monies that are generated, if there is a surplus generated, would actually go back into other housing schemes.
And you can say that categorically.
I can say that categorically. It's not planned. It was part of the Tolson report that one of the options on the table was to bring a UK company in. That was roundly rejected both by DOI and also by Tynwald. So there is absolutely no plans whatsoever for that. So it will not be a UK housing company coming in and taking over ownership of the stock with a bunch of shareholders in the background. It will be a Isle of Man government-owned entity.
Howard?
Yeah, well, what is the point in that? Because to do that, you're going to have to employ a whole lot of bureaucrats within government, and it's already saying that 20% of the people employed on the island are working for government. Well, this is only going to increase the number of people that are working within government, whereas we got the commissioners, we got the councils already doing the job. So you're going to have another paper trail by people working within the government on their wage spines, on the salary spines, which are far higher than what it would be if the council were running it.
Okay,
well, just to be clear, there's no plans to bring local authority housing into this at this current time. The plan is that local authorities be outside. This is the DOI housing stock, public housing stock, and there is already a housing department within DOI. So the plan would be not to create a huge amount of bureaucracy, but potentially that department could become the housing association effectively and transfer over. Okay. But like I say, we'll have to see what DOI actually comes back with to Tynwald, but certainly nothing I've seen suggests there's going to be loads more people on the payroll and loads of things brought in on taxpayers' expense, because the whole point of a housing association as well is it should pay for itself.
So what's the plus in this?
So the plus in this, like I say, if we get it right, is more responsive times for the tenants. Tenants having a more easy time in terms of getting maintenance done. But like I say, I'm still waiting to see what DOI comes back with personally, because I said in my opening remarks, which you might have missed, Howard, because that's basically I've seen tenant housing associations done well in the UK, but I've seen them done abysmally as well. And we need to make sure that this is actually right, if this is the route that we're going down. Because at the moment, and I say if, it's only at the moment DOI that's been tasked away to look at the viability of this and come back to Tynwald. It hasn't actually been a decision made and done. It's still got to go back to Tynwald, and Tynwald's still got to make up its mind.
Howard?
Well, you're saying it's got to go back to Tynwald. We've got 18 months thereabouts.
Well, two and a half years till the next election.
2.5 years?
Yeah, September 26.
True enough, yes, yeah. But that is not a long time when such a very important item such as this housing association, because it doesn't just affect one or two in the private sector or something like that. This is going to affect thousands of people for 20, 30, 40 years. And it's got to have serious thought. And do you think the DOI, as they call themselves, have got the knowledge to work this through? because we've had prime examples of, in the last 5 or 6 years or more, of some of the catastrophic decisions that the DOI have made.
Well, that's why DOI went out for independent expert advice on this. They went out to the Tolson Group, which is a group with a good track record in terms of delivering on housing. They commissioned a report into the viability of a housing association with various options, and that's what came before Tynwald the other month. There was various options in there, but the one that DOI and government were pushing to adopt was the straightforward housing association model, not including local authority housing, not using a UK company, but the option of doing it in-house on the Isle of Man and building our own housing association. And that is what DOI has been tasked by Tynwald to go away. But there has been that expert advice and that expert report, which is a public document available publicly, that actually came before Tynwald and was commissioned.
Okay, thanks, Howard.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Howard.
Good to hear from you. What's the mood of the House regarding housing association? Have you gauged it yet?
Mixed, I would say. I obviously came in as chair of housing communities in the middle of this. So I would say there's people who like potentially the concept and the theory, but like myself actually want to see the detail. So I think that is what will actually determine what Tynwald actually decides to do, is what actually comes back off the back of this. And for me, as I say, the important thing is the tenants first and foremost. What's it going to do for them?
Okay, it's surgery day tomorrow, isn't it?
It is, up in Douglas North. We've got our monthly constituency surgery at Williston School, 11:30 to 1.
That's yourself and Mr. Wannenberg?
Myself and Mr. Wannenberg.
Any councillors there?
Yes, normally all 3 councillors for Douglas North, Councillor Washington, Councillor Tomney and Councillor Horning are normally there as well. We do the surgeries jointly, so anyone with local authority issues, there's someone there to talk to as well.
Okay, that's Williston School, Main Assembly Hall, 11:30 till 1 tomorrow, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and that leads me on to Fiona, who just said, I understand Mr. Ashford to be a very dedicated constituency MHK, and I'd like to ask him what's the most unusual thing any constituent has asked him to do.
That's a very interesting one. After thinking about that, actually, I would say off the top of my head, it actually is not from my time as an MHK, it's from my time as a councillor. Where I went around to see someone about an issue, and while I was there they had a cat who suffers from stress, so can't be left alone, and they asked would I mind babysitting the cat for 20 minutes while they went out and got their shopping, because they couldn't leave the house with the stressed cat, so I sat there and babysat a cat for about 25 minutes.
Do you think people who want to become MHKs, and councillors and commissioners for that matter, understand how much sometimes of a social worker you have to be?
I mean, it is mixed. You get lots of different queries. I mean, I enjoy the constituency work myself, because it might sound, when you lay it out, rather insignificant, some of the things, and people think, why are you bothering with that? But to that person, it means the absolute world. And you can see it when you solve a problem in their face, just how much it's meant to them. So what might sound trivial to someone can be absolutely central to someone else's life. And I think as a politician, that's the bit I really find rewarding, is actually being able to solve an individual problem and seeing how much it meant to that person.
David Ashford's with us through to 1. You want to get in touch? Text, email, call and WhatsApp.
Have you been invited to take part in the Household Income and Expenditure Survey? It's one of the most important surveys for our island, because the information you provide is vital data for our island's financial planning. It helps us calculate our VAT revenue from the UK. Plus, it gives us a better understanding of the financial strains on residents, so we can support those who are struggling. If you've been invited, please take part. Visit gov.im/HIES for more information.
Oh, what's this? Hospice Isle of Man are once again giving you the chance to win a car this Christmas. And tickets are just £25. Even I can't be that generous. Ho, ho, ho. With the Hospice Christmas car draw, you can win an automatic hybrid Renault Captur E-Tech. But hurry, as the draw will take place on the 29th of December. Get your ticket now at hospice.org.im/car draw, or hospice shops, or call 672222. Ho, ho, ho. Brought to you by Hospice in partnership with Altitude.
Mike has got the Conister feeling. Because despite his busy life, getting the finance to sort some home improvements was quicker and easier than he ever dreamt with Conister Bank.
You got me feeling good, got me feeling good, got me feeling good, got me feeling good, yeah!
Ooh, and not even Conister can help improve his singing. Apply online today at conisterbank.co.in and you'll get the Conister feeling too. All loans are subject to status. Terms and conditions apply. Early settlement fees apply.
Excited about starting your new business but feel daunted by accounts, tax and VAT? Then talk to Nicola Bowker & Co. before you do anything else. From expert advice to getting a helping hand, Nicola Bowker & Co. can help and guide you. Call 861 271.
Get ready for another winning weekend on Manx Radio.
And this weekend, we're giving you the chance to win a real Christmas tree and a set of lights from Ramsey Garden Centre. Call in to see their exclusive Christmas showroom with ornaments and gifts, wreaths, artificial and real trees, along with Christmas lights for indoors and out.
Visit manxradio.com and answer the competition question for your chance to win.
And on Monday morning, join us for Manx Radio Breakfast when you can find out if you're the lucky winner.
Make this your winning weekend with your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And David Ashford, MHK. And Neil as well. You're live with David Ashford, Neil.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, Andy, and good afternoon, Mr. Ashford.
Good afternoon, Neil.
I have 2 points I'd like to raise, please. The first one is in regard to the housing issue. When a government going to enact legislation to prevent widespread speculation within our housing market, not just from wealthy people who are moving to the Isle of Man who are buying up a considerable amount of properties, but also offshore companies and individuals in the UK and further afield. This has two impacts. Number one, it is keeping the price of housing artificially high. And number two, in regard to the housing social issues which you've just been discussing, people who would ordinarily move from council houses into a first-time buyer house or something a little more substantial once their children get a little easier, who would release that social housing for people who were in their position when they were young, they are unable to do so because of the high price of property and, of course, the high price of rent. In tandem with that, exactly the same situation is forcing young Manx people to vacate the island. They do technical apprenticeships. They work very, very hard. I find them wonderful to get on with, really nice lads and girls, and within 2 or 3 years they're gone. So that is my first question. When are we going to have legislation to prevent this happening? My second point is, how can an area of land which is zoned as green gap and open space, and where previous applications have been turned down 3 times by the previous planning officer, Miss Sarah Corlett, how can Hartford Homes and Mr. Philip Richards now be allowed to develop this site, removing a substantial number of trees, killing a resident bat colony which roost in those trees, which are protected under the Manx Wildlife Act?
And so whereabouts is this? Just for the uninitiated, Neil, where is it?
North on the Douglas Road between the airport and Castletown. You'll see all the trees going. Okay. The bat colony in there. I raised it a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the first question first, if
okay.
you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of that with the properties, it is already being looked at as a work stream to potentially bring forward legislation in terms of second homes, in terms of how we incentivise or disincentivise people in that area. So in terms of rates could be used as a mechanism. There's also a work stream going on around unoccupied properties with a similar vein in terms of how we can look to get those unoccupied properties back into use. Because that's absolutely, and also ensure that we don't just end up with a lot of properties owned by speculators. There's already been changes in terms of the cost at the registries. That legislation went through last year, so you actually pay now a higher amount if you are not going to have it as your primary home, and it's based around the value as well in terms of percentages. So already we are actually charging more for people if they are saying they're not going to be moving into the island, they're just going to own it speculatively.
Is that enough of a disincentive?
Well, I think there's still work to do personally around that in terms of like I say, second homes, but there's things you can do with the rating system as well. But it is a work stream that's underway and being discussed across government. In terms of the second query in relation to planning, obviously you'd have to have the correct zoning in place to be able to do a planning application. It will go as the outgoing chair of the planning committee. Who was chair of planning up until 2 weeks ago. What I would say is, when something like that goes through, it has to come before the full committee. The committee's made up of lay people along with the political chair. They go through every aspect of the application. In a lot of cases, things like that are queried and questioned, and ultimately they will then decide whether or not they support that planning application. But there is a raft of planning policies that have to be adhered to before it would receive approval. And of course, ultimately, if people are unhappy with it, if they've got interested person status, they can appeal the application.
What about if people keep coming back, as Neil said, with the same application, just because, if the left hand doesn't get you, the right one will?
Well, that doesn't tend to work in my experience. Unless you change the application, you're not going to get anywhere. I was only chair of planning for 18 months, but I can say in my 18 months as chair of planning, we never had a case where someone came back with the same application and got a different result. People will normally come back with a variance on an application, because then it may go before planning, and which has happened during my time, where we've said, actually, we like the concept, but we're just not happy with this planning application. Go away, make some changes and come back. So they have taken on board the advice. They've varied what the planning committee has actually said they're not happy with, and come back with a similar application, but not the same application. Okay. And that can happen from time to time.
A final word, Neil?
Yes, well, in relation to the first answer which Mr. Ashford gave me, I think there needs to be a very strident approach in introducing a strong speculation tax, and possibly at the initial buying process period, and also an 80% tax take on rental. That would solve it in one sweep of a pen. In relation to your second comment, what I fail to understand is how, when it says in the area plan, this green gap area development will not be permitted in bold letters, how it can be permitted, which leads me to wonder, is the area plan actually worth the paper it's written on? Or should
Well, I would say in terms of the area plan, it is worth the paper it's written on. I don't know the specific application you're referring to, so it's very hard for me to comment on that specific application without actually having the information in front of me. But normally in terms of planning, it would follow the area plan. And if that is the case and that has been approved, then I would say personally, I can say this now, I'm not chair of planning, it would be grounds for appeal, I would have thought, if the area plan's saying one thing and the planning decision has been another. In terms of a speculative tax, we've just got to be very careful, particularly when we're talking about rentals, that we don't decrease the rental market, because we've got cases now where people are finding it very hard to rent properties, and we've got to be sure we don't do anything that will force landlords out of that marketplace and make it tougher for people to find rented properties, and in fact have the opposite effect and drive rents higher because there's more demand for less properties. But we also need to look at other schemes as well, such as rent to buy and also the shared equity schemes, and there's reviews in that area going on as well, because we need to be encouraging the whole piece of housing, including those who want to actually buy their own homes.
Okay, Neil, thank you. Interesting, but we have to press on because lots more questions, including one that came from yesterday. Stephen called yesterday and just said, when the government, obviously, the Department for Enterprise has confirmed that those three proposals, the one Lake Road in Douglas, the Ocean Castle Hotel in Port Erin, and Loch Promenade in Douglas, getting a lot of government support. I mean, the private sector's putting in 50 million, but it could be 25% of funding in support of registered unoccupied urban areas. Why don't they do that for individual people? Why just for big companies?
So there is in terms of the affordable housing schemes. So in terms of the affordable housing schemes, there effectively is a subsidy there. So in terms of affordable housing, we're planning on building over the next couple of years around 150 properties. Over the next couple of years, there's been 35 delivered so far this year. So there is a subsidy in that sense for the actual different schemes. when it comes to developing vacant sites, we've got to recognise there are some vacant sites, particularly around Douglas, that are not easy to develop. And we've tried the approach of just let the market try and do its thing. And what's it got us? It's got us absolutely nowhere, in my view. So we do have to try something different, and we do have to recognise that we don't want government building on these sites. I don't think anyone would want that, particularly after Liverpool Landing Stage and certain other things. But we've got to incentivise the private sector to do it. And if we can get these sites developed that wouldn't otherwise be developed and in use, then that's got to be a good thing.
OK, live with David Ashford in a moment.
No matter how much you need to dig, or how much you want to dump,
Fox Group Isle of Man offer an extensive range of plant hire, long-term lease and sales. We're the island's exclusive supplier for Louis Gong excavators with immediate delivery. Our machinery comes with a complete service package with finance plan options. Call John on 458946 to discuss your plant needs. Fox Group Isle of Man, part of the Fox Group of companies.
There's a new way to Subway with 2 fantastic menus. Which will you go for? The all-new Subway series with 15 irresistible creations like the Big Bombay Sub, Great Goddess Salad, Emperor Wrap and Big Cheesesteak Sub Melt. Or create your own. You pick the ingredients you want and build your own sub, salad or wrap the way you want it. There's a great mix of healthy and indulgent menu items available from Subway and ShopRite, Peel and Port Erin.
Aged over 50, struggling to get life assurance due to health issues? Want to leave some money for loved ones? Chase Wealth Solutions can help. A life policy with no medical questions, no underwriting, guaranteed acceptance, and just a few details from you. Cover starts from only £10 per month. Find out more now. Call Chase Wealth Solutions on 640-350 or email lifecover@chasewealth.im. Chase Financial Services Limited, trading as Chase Wealth Solutions, is regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Have you heard the news?
We're number one. We're family run. Mike's Motors. Mike's Motors.
The huge Mike's Motors winter sale is now on, with prices that will warm your heart, a handsome £200 worth of Marks & Spencer's vouchers, and a full tank of fuel with every vehicle sold. Buy now with nothing to pay for 3 months and up to £500 cashback available on all our finance deals. So come on down to Castletown and grab your deal today. T's and C's apply. Mike's Motors is an approved Conister Bank partner.
How has the mild-mannered, generally innocuous Health Services Consultative Committee been drawn into a heated political debate with the Health Minister? Laurie Hooper has accused the committee of deliberate falsehood, lying to you and me. And both sides have accused each other of making defamatory statements. Chris Thomas will be calling on Tynwald to annul changes made to the committee's constitution at this month's sitting. So what on earth is going on? We try to find out on Perspective this Sunday at 12 noon on Manx Radio with me, Phil Gaughan. Is independent scrutiny being silenced, or is this just an important change of focus?
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And David Ashford. I'm not going to spare your blushes, David. 2 years ago, I was going through a really hard time and felt alone. I was backed into a corner from certain professionals on the Isle of Man, and I reached out to David Ashford. He was very helpful, gave me his time and helped me more than he will ever know. He gave me hope, and I was able to get out of the corner I was backed into. I'll be forever grateful. Keep up the good work, David. It can't be the first time you've heard something like that.
Well, it's good to hear. Like I said, earlier on, Andy, it's the individual cases that for me is what politics is about, and actually, being able to try and help people, and that's wonderful to hear.
Okay, Juan, you're live with David Ashford.
Afternoon, Andy. Hey, David, how are you?
Hi, Juan. Yeah, not too bad.
Good. I see you've been invited back into the Coven of Kerman again.
Well, I haven't actually. The Housing Communities Chair sits outside a Council of Ministers. It's not a ministerial job, so I'm chairing but I'm still a backbencher, so I'm still able to question and query with freedom.
Good. A question on the association and then a general question on housing. I just want quickly on Neil's point there about more housing becoming available to younger people. I think the problem after that, obviously, is getting the money from the banks. I think it's all right making the housing available, but can the young people get the money from the banks? Can they loan it? That's the first thing on that. The association, I'm looking at switching out accountability, basically. I know the government, or the DOI, as you said, is the landlord, have been asked many questions reference their housing stock compared with the regulations that they're trying to impose on private landlords. And I look at what government's done with Manx Care, with the childcare, St Christopher's, and all that kind of stuff. And they've kind of made themselves non-accountable for this stuff by making it arm's length. Now, are the government trying to do the same thing here again with housing, so as they don't have to impose these regulations and be accountable themselves by putting the association in as an intermediary? Would be my first point. My second is generally on housing itself. I believe it was bandied around some time ago in government about banning energy efficiency on houses, thus leading to sale pricing if you've not got energy efficiency in the housing. Now, bearing in mind the amount of old and Victorian housing stock, I'm just wondering, and this is in the not the rental sector, but just private housing per se, that this was going to force people into expensive repairs to their houses, which maybe some people can't afford, because government are going to introduce some kind of price banding compared to how efficient the housing is. And I'm wondering if that's still getting bandied around within government.
Yeah, so I'll take the last point first, which is the energy efficiency banding seems to have died a death. I think that would have had more complications than it's worth, particularly, as you rightly point out, when we've got the mix of housing stock on the island, and some of the properties that we might be trying to encourage young people to go into are some of the older properties that might become vacant, to do them up and so on, and that would just be an added disincentive for them taking those properties on. Your first point around the mortgages is a very valid point. It's something I've said for many years about the different schemes. We've got to make sure that when it comes to income thresholds and people's ability to get in, we take account of that. So we need to work with the banks and the financial institutions, because I've seen cases where people are told, right, you qualify for the scheme, but they then can't get a mortgage. Or people who can get a mortgage but then are told their income's over the threshold for the scheme. So they lose out both sides. So we've got to work with the banks and the financial institutions around that, and see what we can do as a government to try and drive that forward. So that is definitely part of the work streams that the Housing Communities Board needs to drive forward. In terms of the Housing Association, certainly for me, the important thing, which I said earlier on in this show, was that democratic accountability of the Housing Association is absolutely key. It can't just simply become some sort of arm's length body and we say that's all their problem. When it comes to public housing, it's all of our problems because it's owned by the taxpayer ultimately. And I think that, for me, I want to know how that housing association is going to keep some form of democratic accountability. And in terms of the standards for private landlords and public, I've been on record for a long number of years on this. I've got a pre-declared position, and my pre-declared position is I do not see, if you're imposing standards on the private sector, why those standards shouldn't equally apply to the public sector.
Okay, all right, thanks, Stuart.
Cheers, guys, thank you.
So, David Ashford, what about the possibility of a government mortgage then for first-time buyers, for young Manx people?
Well, that's something that would need to be explored. It hasn't been explored yet, and I'm going to be quite honest and say it's not currently on the Housing Communities Board action plan. Government mortgages were around, of course, in the 70s, early 80s, and from what I can see and what research I've done, they did seem to work very well. But that is something that is a bit higher than my remit, should you say, because we'd have to have involvement with Treasury and all sorts in that. So I can't make any commitments on that response. But certainly in the 70s and 80s, it did appear to get people onto the housing ladder. But I think the first point to call is us working with the financial institutions out there to see what we can do. And then if that doesn't work, what's then the backstop? And
allowed them to stay on the Isle of Man. Many people got government mortgages and they stayed and obviously are still here. Well, we're out of time. We didn't even talk about assisted dying. We didn't even talk about dilapidated properties. Quite a few emails regarding dilapidated properties, but that's about it for today. So tomorrow, if you want to see David Ashford along with John Wannenberg and the councillors, Williston School Main Assembly Hall, 11:30 through to 1. There is another MHK about tomorrow as well. Rob Callister has got his constituency surgery at Oncon Community Hall, the Hub, from 10 to 11:30. So So MHK is out and about tomorrow. In the meantime, David Asher, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks as always, Andy.
Good to talk to you. That's it for Mannin Line this week. Thanks to Chris Quirk on the phones today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Open line on Monday, and next Thursday we're live at Ramsey Grammar School with the students in the north.
W